Robin Eisler. I'm the founder of BoosterHub. I'm going to be at Ponte Vedra, Arkansas. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking a summer evening here to learn about Booster Club accounting. To go ahead and get started, we'll give everyone a chance to jump on and take notes. So the format tonight, I'm going to focus on general accounting for about the first 30 to 35 minutes of the webinar, and then we'll move over to specifically BoosterHub accounting, and I'll show you some of the features that BoosterHub accounting does, some of the things that I think are cool. I consider myself the Booster Club accounting evangelist. I am on a mission to make Booster Club accounting simpler for everyone, to make it easier. And that's because over our 5 years at Booster Hub, we've seen volunteer treasurers spend hours and hours and hours every month working on the accounting of their booster clubs. And we're determined to make that process easier and more efficient, so that they can spend more time with their families and less time worrying about the books of the booster club. So we'll see a little bit of that tonight. We've made a lot of progress at Booster Hub on that mission, and we continue to push forward on that mission. And you have our commitment that we are going to keep pursuing it until it's as easy as clicking a button. That's my goal, that we'll get there. So as I mentioned, this is a great opportunity to collaborate with other boosters. I know that Booster Club officers don't always get a chance to ask questions of each other, but go ahead and drop questions in the chat. And if you've got an answer, feel free to drop that in there as well. If you stay on to the end, we've got a special offer both on Booster Hub if you're not a subscriber, and I've also got a sales tax handout tonight that I thought would be useful. So we've got that at the end. Well, let's go ahead and dive into it. So why is this so important? And this is something that I think a booster club that knows where every dollar goes is a booster club that's earned the right to ask for the next dollar. So your job as the guardian of your booster club is to make sure that every dollar that comes in and every dollar that's spent is accounted for. And this is really important because when people make a donation, particularly to nonprofits, they want to know that the money is being put to good use, and that it's getting to the students, because that's the whole goal here. And so you're really the guardians of that. You're making sure that that money is accounted for, that it is getting to the right places, watching out for fraud and theft. And so that's why this is so important. That's why we go through that process. So a lot of you, you're dropped in, you're not accountants. You stepped up to help, and all of a sudden you're like the CFO of some corporation here that's doing some amount of money every year. And you didn't know that. You thought you were just going to get a checkbook and maybe write some checks here and there. And all of a sudden people are asking you, how much money did we make on this? Were we profitable? Where'd the money go? When's the budget going to be approved? You're like, holy goodness, this is not what I signed up for. And so, people are asking, where did the money go? Cash, events, invoices, debit cards, deposits. All of a sudden, we've built a very complex system here that wasn't, too long ago. We were just dealing with some check reimbursements and such. But as our schools have had funding reduced and more funding relies on the booster clubs, our finances have gotten more complicated. And then also you have year-end duties. You have to file a tax return every year if you're an incorporated nonprofit. If you're not, that's a different webinar, and you should be. So Google for help on that. You probably should be paying sales tax on some of your items, collecting sales tax rather than remitting it to your state. You may have to do 1099s if you're paying for services for people that are helping your booster club. So all of a sudden you've got a lot of compliance things, a lot of legal things to think about, and most of that falls on the head of the booster club treasurer. So if you're not a treasurer tonight, this is super helpful. And if you are a treasurer, we're going to dive in and give you some tips and tricks on how to make it easier. So tonight we're going to go over just accounting simplified, what it is, what it isn't. We're going to dive into the chart of accounts because that gets really important. And I think a lot of people get confused on that. So we're going to dive into what that is, talk about budgets and some of my favorite reports, how to handle money in, money out, automation and bank sync, checks and balances, and then we'll dive into a little Booster Hub accounting. So we get this, like, whenever I do a webinar, I like to start very simple and work my way up to a big strategy. So really accounting, we're talking about the money came in, the money went out, and what's left over. It's pretty simple, right? So we should be able to do this, plus, minus, what's left. It should be pretty basic. And it is, except there's a lot of things that questions that we have to answer. And so it's really those questions that we have to answer that drive the reports and the compliance things that we have to do. And that's where things get complicated. And so if you're just trying to know how much came in and out and what's left over, it's relatively easy. But if you want to know things like, were we profitable on our most recent fundraiser? That's a good question, and you need to be able to answer that. And so some of the processes that we're going to talk about tonight will help you set up those reports so that you can answer those questions. So before we dive into what came in and what came out, let's talk about whose money it is. There are some cases where the booster club money flows to the school and it goes into the school district funds. In most cases, the money flows to the nonprofit booster club, and it's not school district funds. So this is where we're focusing tonight. Everything that we're talking about is under the assumption that your booster club is a nonprofit and that hopefully you have 501(c) status, because you should. Otherwise you're a profitable organization, and not an organization where the money flows to the school district, because this would have a different strategy on accounting. And so I think the first question is, whose money is it? Secondly, we get a lot of questions about individual fundraising accounts, and this is really the test on those. If you are a nonprofit, you can't, according to the IRS, hold individual fundraising accounts. If your money flows into the school district, it may be possible to hold individual fundraising accounts. So that's sort of the simple test to that question that gets asked a lot. So let's start with our accounting maturity ladder. So level 1, this is the basic spreadsheet and budget. This is probably where almost every booster club was more than 5 years ago. You're running the ins and outs, maybe tracking by category, maybe have a budget. Generally, your revenues are less than $50,000 a year. This is pretty easy, but it doesn't help answer a lot of those questions that we get. What was our net revenue? How much did we make on the fundraiser? Was our spiritware profitable? If you're just doing a spreadsheet, you're probably not going to be able to answer those questions. When we get to level 2, we're talking about using a formal system or financial reports. This is typically where our booster clubs move into what we call double entry accounting. And that's when you put something in an income account, you're also putting something in an asset account. And this is where you can start to create those reports and answer those questions. Generally, if your booster club's doing more than $50,000 a year, you probably need to be on a system like this. And that's because your tax return is going to require more detail than if you're doing less than $50,000 a year. And then level 3, this is where we get to more complicated things like invoicing. If you're one of our marching band programs, you're probably doing some type of invoicing. This really complicates your accounting, because now you're moving to accounts receivable, accrual basis instead of cash basis. And this is where things get complicated and make it challenging to be a volunteer treasurer. So you're probably somewhere around this level. If you're here, that's okay. It's a good place to be. You may want to look at moving to something more formal. This is what a typical level 1 accounting system would look like. This is what our bank balance was. This came in, this went out. This is our total at the end. It's great. It doesn't tell you how much overall we made in concessions. It doesn't tell you overall how much our expenses are, but you can see the direct data here in the ledger. And so this is generally, we'll see this in a lot of our smaller booster clubs. Again, good information, but doesn't quite give you the decision-making tools that you need, which is one of the reasons we move on to more advanced accounting. Okay, let's talk about the chart of accounts. I like to call these buckets. And when you're setting up your initial accounting system, whether it be in BoosterHub or in another accounting software, you are going to need to create a chart of accounts. In some softwares, you're going to get a pre-selected form. That's good. In BoosterHub, you're going to get one of those, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And you're going to have to break those down into income and expenses. And those are the things that people think about most of the time. Things like donations or fundraising or concessions or merchandise. And then expenses, again, you may have general program expenses, some fundraising expenses, but then we also need to think about our asset accounts. So you're going to have things like bank accounts, credit card processing accounts. A lot of people don't think of these as asset accounts, but if you're using any credit card processing system, you're going to need to be tracking that money. If I have something in a Venmo account, it should be in your chart of accounts. If I have something in a Square account, it should be in your chart of accounts because there's time periods where you have funds sitting in those accounts. If you have cash boxes, you're probably going to want to list those in your chart of accounts. In BoosterHub, we offer prepaid debit cards, and those also function like a bank account, and so they're going to show up in your assets. In booster clubs, rarely do we see liabilities. It's not too common. Typically, if we see them, you're going to have a sales tax liability. That's the money that you've collected that you're due to remit to the state. Some booster clubs are using credit cards. It's pretty rare, but you'll see it, and occasionally we'll see an accounts payable. So these are the type of accounts that you're going to want to create, and the way you're going to create these accounts is going to depend on your booster club, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. I see a couple questions. So yes, you can edit the chart of accounts in BoosterHub. We do force you to stay within the guardrails that we've set, and that's for this purpose, to align with the 990 tax return. And donations and in-kind donations would be monetary, cash, or some sort of online donation or something like that. In-kind would typically be products or services that have been donated, and how you account for those will be subject to your own booster club rules. So some people account for those on their financial statements and some people don't. So that would be something you would want to ask your CPA or accountant. So let's talk about chart of accounts. So I like to start with the end in mind. If we know at the end of the year we have to file a tax return and these are the categories that they want, then let's make it easy on ourselves and start with those categories. So that's what we do in BoosterHub. And it also is a pretty smart framework on how to set everything up. So we've got our contributions, gift and grants, our programs, membership dues, fundraising, and so on. The reason I do this is because it helps, one, put your money in buckets that are going to go in the right place at the end of the year, but also to make you ask questions. So for example, under fundraising, you'll see fundraising, gaming, and non-gaming. And we get a lot of questions about this in BoosterHub. That's because on your tax return, you have to note which fundraisers were the result of gaming and which were not. And so it also makes people ask the question, what does fundraising gaming mean? And it probably means that if you're doing any sort of fundraising with any type of gambling in it, you're going to need a license likely from your state, and help separate those two categories. So it's kind of giving you those guardrails of, hey, we're putting this here for a reason. Maybe you need to ask some questions about it. Then in BoosterHub, we also pre-fill anything that we know is typical. In a booster club, you'll see things like banquet or entry fees. If you're running a concession stand or Booster Bucks fundraiser, those are going to go under the non-gaming fundraising accounts. And then things like transaction fees. And then we also have our cash tally reconcile account. So these are, if you open your BoosterHub account, this is what is going to be your default chart of accounts, and you can customize these down to the next level. So for example, under donations, you may want to break that down into sponsorships or other types of donations, so that you can see that. And you may want to have many categories under your fundraising. So that's entirely up to you. Question, yes, in BoosterHub, you can download the chart of accounts. You will do it from, that's a good question. You can't download directly from chart of accounts, but you can from the reports. And the general ledger should give you all of the chart of accounts if you wanted to download it from there. Raffle tickets are generally a gaming fundraiser if there's a prize involved. So typically it would be gaming. So some of the questions people ask is, how deep should your chart of accounts go? And that really depends. If you're a smaller organization and you want to see lots of detail in your reporting, you can make each thing perhaps your banquet and your tickets for your banquets, entry fees, and then decorations. You might want to see that in expense. You could detail that out, or you could put it all in one expense for your banquet. I think silent auction, yes, you could add it as a line item in your chart of accounts. I think in BoosterHub, we give you some other ways to categorize income and expenses. And sometimes that's better than making a line item on your chart of accounts. So generally, I would say if it's something that happens every year and you don't necessarily need to see whether or not that specific thing was profitable, then you can put it in your chart of accounts. If you want to see if that thing was profitable, and it may or may not happen every year, then you may want to use our category tags and program tags, which allow you to look at those expenses to pivot the reports versus putting every single one as a line item in your chart of accounts. And in general, I like to see a cleaner, shorter chart of accounts rather than a longer one. So if you can avoid putting in a chart of accounts and you can get the information from category and program tags, then I find that that's a better solution. We'll dive into that when we get to the BoosterHub part at the end. So we'll talk about 3 reports that I think everyone should know. The profit and loss, which in a nonprofit is called the statement of activities. It's also called the income statement, which is what we use in BoosterHub. It's also very similar to your budget versus actual. It just doesn't have your budget numbers in there, but these all really do the same thing. They're looking at what came in and what went out in a period of time. So I like to call it a movie. Over this period of time, this happened. The report that I don't see enough people look at is the balance sheet, or in nonprofits, we call it a statement of financial position. And that's how much is sitting in all of your accounts on a specific date. This is really important, and you can do a lot of reconciling with this report. And I find that a lot of treasurers have never looked at it. So it's important to look at your balance sheet, make sure that it makes sense with your profit and loss. It also sums your profit and loss over the entire period that your organization has existed. So it's a real valuable report, something that you'll want to look at. And then the treasurer's report, it really does the job of both of those. So it's going to look at the ins and outs over a period of time, and the beginning asset balance and the closing asset balance at the end of the period. This is typically the report that you'll use in a booster club along with your budget versus actual. But I think it's really helpful to understand the profit and loss or income statement and the balance sheet as well, because it'll really help you understand what's going on in your booster club. So I have some samples here. I know these are a little small on the screen, but this is our income statement or profit and loss, and it looks similar to your budget, and it's going to have all of your chart of accounts, income and expenses. So in any of those reports, only your income and expenses are going to show, and you'll see all of your ins and all of your outs and what the net was at the end. So this is why we often hear this referred to as your profit and loss. They don't like to use that terminology in nonprofits because it's a nonprofit. So we call it the income statement. And then the balance sheet is going to list your assets and liabilities and retained earnings, which is your net income over the entire period that you've existed. And so you'll see all of your bank accounts, cash boxes. If you're using debit cards, those will be on there. And then you'll have your liabilities, which is generally sales tax. You may have some other things in there. And your assets should equal your liabilities and accumulated funds. That's how it works. That's why it's called a balance sheet. Don't get too wrapped up in that. Most importantly is to be checking and making sure that these balances align with what's actually happening in those accounts. I get a lot of people say, oh my gosh, I just reconciled my bank statement and it has this much in it, and this ledger doesn't match that amount. I think you have to remember that there's always, well, almost always money in transit. There's money moving from one account to another. So it's very hard unless maybe you're at the end of the season to make all of those accounts line up and have the same number. Because on any given day, there's credit card deposits being made, there's withdrawals being made. And so some people get really confused about that. But remember, you likely have a lot of money in transit in the background. And so if you have anything outstanding or anything moving, those amounts are not going to match. And then the treasurer's report. On this report, we like to give it as if it's being presented at a meeting. So it's got who pulled it, the date range, last reconcile, last audit, and your starting cash balance, any income that came in, your net change in cash, and then the positions of those asset accounts, like where is the money, where is it sitting right now? You might have $500 sitting in your cash box for change or things like that. So you'll see that there. And then I put a budget versus actual in here just to see it. So again, it's using the same chart of accounts. Looks very similar to our income statement. It just gives you that budget column versus the actual and then the variance. Very helpful report. The other reports tell you what happened, and this kind of tells you how you're doing. So you can say, hey, this was our goal and this is where we are. So this is how we're doing. So it's more of a measurement versus this is what happened report. When you're looking at all your reports, it's another good one to see. So then when we talk about accounting, what are we doing? We're bookkeeping. Everyone kind of gets, I think, in the weeds sometimes on what we're doing in accounting, and then it can get really complicated. I think the reality is we're just recording the money that came in and we're recording the money that came out. And if you are doing accounting properly, you should have some sort of report or input that shows you every transaction that came in and some data on that transaction, and then categorize it, and then same for money out. And this can get complicated if you're running a concession stand at night and you do 500 transactions. All of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of money coming in that to detail that can get complex. And so I think some people get overwhelmed with the amount of data, but really all we're doing is recording and categorizing it, and recording and categorizing it coming out. And that's one of the things that BoosterHub does. It does really well for you. If you're using the BoosterHub store tools, cashier store and online store, all of your money coming in is being input. It's all being categorized, and that work is done for you. If you're using our expense tools, then a lot of the money going out is also that bookkeeping's being done for you. And then your role becomes more of a reconciler, which is really where I'd like to get every treasurer, where you're doing very little actual bookkeeping or data entry and a lot more just verifying that things are doing what they're supposed to do. Let's see. So how do you handle reimbursement items in the chart of accounts? For example, we have parts of our band fees listed in our BoosterHub store for families to pay for, so they have to be an income type, but the boosters purchase those items, so they need to be expense. Tiffany, typically we would that would be income when someone purchases it. So perhaps it would be uniform income, and then you would have an expense category also below that. Um, I probably wouldn't put that as a line item in chart of accounts. I would use a category tag on that. So you could categorize the income and expense, and then you can pull a profit and loss report with that category tag. And Amy there, she answered it. You're right, cash in and cost of goods sold. So and let's see, yes, you do have to establish or set up a category initially. So when you set up your products in your BoosterHub store, it's required that you link it to a chart of accounts and accounting, and that's what does the work for you. So generally, we recommend that anyone setting up the store be working with the treasurer. And this is a good question that Tiffany asked. This is exactly what you would ask: is how do we want that categorized, and do we want any tags on that so that we can pull reports to see the income and the cost of goods sold on that item. And then it does it automatically from that point forward. I like to say that accounting automation is like having a team of treasurers working around the clock, sorting every dollar into the right bucket, so your volunteers can focus on the kids instead of the books. So as much as you can automate, you should automate. It's really helpful, particularly as our booster organizations have grown and we're now dealing with thousands of transactions. You really need to have some sort of automated tool doing your accounting. So let's talk about the money coming in, and again, start with the end in mind. So just the question that you just asked, Sarah, is yes, when you create those products in those stores, you are going to select the income account for those so that it automatically happens. And so you're starting with the end in mind before you take your first dollar in. You're going to say, how are we going to organize this income so that it'll report easily and so that we can get the information easily. So you'll also want to track your cash. So I recommend that you count it with two people. If you can get it deposited as soon as possible, same day is great. Cash gets really hard to track the longer it sits. So the sooner you can get your cash deposits in the bank, the better. But sometimes that's not possible. An event happens on Friday and you have to go over the weekend. You'll definitely want to have some sort of tool like a cash tally sheet. So in BoosterHub, if you end your event, you submit a cash tally sheet. The treasurer has that information, knows that those funds are waiting to be deposited, and then you can deposit them as soon as you get a chance. You'll want to categorize every dollar that's coming in. We've been talking about this. So every single thing that you're going to sell, is that concessions? Is that a donation? Is it merchandise? Is it a gaming fundraiser? Is it non-gaming? Have those discussions early on so that there's just never a question. You already know where it's going to go when the item is created. One of the things that we have in BoosterHub in the store is something called packages. And packages are designed specifically for this reason. So if you are going to sell a sponsorship and it has a donation in it, and it has some merchandise in it, and it has perhaps entry tickets in it, you can break that down into different products specifically so those funds flow into the appropriate account. So packages were built specifically for that reason, to categorize every single dollar that comes in. Now let's talk about things like Venmo and Zelle. Zelle is a great tool. It is one of the only free tools that you can use to move money. And it's great, except when you have 100 people sending you a Zelle, and then you have no idea what that's for, or which invoice it's paying, or what product they're trying to buy. So I caution to be careful using it. A lot of people get excited about it because there's no transaction fees, but it can create a real burden on your treasurer. And we get copied sometimes on Zelle receipts, and it's just, what's this for? And there's 3 or 4 emails going back and forth. So sometimes when you're picking out which tool to use, you may be able to save a little bit there. But then it's going to cost your treasurer an enormous amount of time. And I've really seen this really burden the treasurers and even the Venmo accounts. All this money's coming in, they don't know what it's for. Then Venmo has other risk as well. So you want to think about, hey, if we are going to use a third-party system for some reason, how's that going to impact the accounting? How's that going to impact how we categorize things? How am I going to know what that's for? So you want to, again, start with the end in mind, think about how am I going to get this into the reporting, and then decide how you're going to set up your processes. Now let's talk about the money out. You do need a receipt for everything in a nonprofit. It's just a best practice to have receipts and have them attached to the transactions. BoosterHub gives you several ways to do this. You can use our expense request form where you can attach a receipt and then it attaches to the transaction. The debit cards are a great way to do this because they collect that data. The expense information comes in automatically. And if you're using the debit cards and the expense request form, they match up and it's very easy to add those transactions to your accounting. Sometimes people want to have things like we have it on our expense request form. They want to put the category in. That's really the job of the treasurer. So even when you're talking about the income side, the treasurer should be the one saying, this is where this money is going to go. It's going to go in this bucket because I've created this report. So you want to make sure you let the treasurer do the categorizing of the expenses because they're going to know which area those need to go to. For the expense part with the receipt, it doesn't require reimbursement, does it? Sarah, I'm not sure I understand that question. You can just submit it and accept it. If you don't need actual reimbursement, you don't need to do that. In BoosterHub, we have it set up two ways. One is a check request, which would be expecting a reimbursement, and the other is a debit card expense, which would expect to match to a debit card. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not. Oh, you have a credit card. So yeah, you would probably want to use the debit card reimbursement form, then it could match to the credit cards. Okay, so now we've moved from our basic ledger. We've gotten to how to build our chart of accounts and our reports. So now let's talk about the automation, and we've already mentioned it, and the bank sync. So again, in BoosterHub, anything you're accepting payments on, any income syncs automatically. So your credit card account that comes in from all your credit cards billed, that's going to deposit automatically into your bank account. And in BoosterHub, we make the accounting entries of that. The system moves the money as it moves from your credit card account into your bank account. That all happens automatically. And it'll tell you if there's a transaction missing, you'll get an alert. Doesn't happen very often, but occasionally at the processor, a transaction gets stuck, you'll get an alert to say that these don't match. You're going to want an automation for your cash counts. Again, in BoosterHub, we have the cash tally sheet, and that's a great way to record the cash and get it in the system so that there's some bookkeeping happening automatically, and that happens. And then you can link your bank account. This is probably the one that I see the most trouble with for a couple different reasons. So one, when you link your bank account and it's importing transactions, it can duplicate what's already happened in the system. So in that case, you're going to be matching those transactions to things you've already input into accounting. Now, whether you're using BoosterHub and that's happening automatically, or you've done manual counting and already entered those, in most cases, you should be matching the incoming bank transactions to the records already in your system. If you are adding a new transaction, that's a great thing to do. But I caution you on that because you probably don't have the records that you need in your system to add that. So because it's a best practice for booster clubs to have all the documentation, the receipts for things like expenses. If you're just clicking add and adding all that and saying, oh, yeah, this is concessions and this is merchandise, I kind of call this lazy accounting. I'm just adding this all in big buckets and yep, we got a deposit today. I see this a lot with Square accounts. Oh yeah, that was concessions, so we know there's really no data to back that up other than that's what came in, and you don't have a good way to reconcile it. So just caution it. And then also remember that it's not doing your actual banking. This is just viewing of transactions and importing them. And then you're going to want to best practice match that to documentation that's already happened in the system. Careful with the automation in the sync. It happens quick. And if you don't keep up on it, it's going to be overwhelming. You're going to open your accounting after not being in it for a month and go, oh my gosh, there's 500 transactions and there's all this and I don't know where to start. So I definitely recommend jumping in weekly, making sure you're just simply reconciling it. It should only take a few minutes if you're doing it weekly. If you let it get behind, it can be a bit overwhelming. Kristen, I need you to walk through step by step how to sync and categorize. I'll show you that at the end when we walk through BoosterHub. What's the difference between a settlement, an EOM, and a daily deposit? So that's a UCO designation. So EOM is usually your monthly fees. Daily deposit is your credit card deposits, and sometimes you'll see PDS, which is an ACH deposit. So those are the different designations from UCO. And then we'll jump into checks and balances. So this is my goal. This is where I hope that we can get every treasurer within the next year, is so you're really just doing the checks and balances. You're just making sure everything's there, that it matches and it reconciles. But it's also just generally a best practice to make sure there's no fraud or theft or anything missing or mistakes. The banks make mistakes, the credit card companies make mistakes, people make mistakes, software makes mistakes. So I think that this is really the goal. If we can get all the treasurers to just working in this window, that'll be great. So we're on target for that, but we still have a little bit of work to do. So first thing, you want to use those cash sheets. If you are still collecting cash in your booster club, make sure you have documentation, you're recording it, and making sure it's being verified that that money's been deposited. You'll want to review the sync. So what's happening in your bank account, what's happening in BoosterHub, did all of those things capture everything they're supposed to? Are the amounts correct? That's one of the best things you can do to make sure that your books are accurate. And then finally, the biggest problem that I see is that people don't reconcile their accounts at the end of the month. So you should reconcile every account, every bank account, checking account, savings account, and your BoosterHub debit cards. You should get the statement, match the beginning and ending balance, make sure all the transactions are there and everything matches. And this should be done monthly. If you get beyond a month into 2 months, it gets hard to find the errors. It makes it much more challenging to do. So I'm going to say, if you have one place to spend your time, this is where I would spend it. And again, I think a weekly check-in is the good measure. And if you're doing it weekly, it should take you 15 minutes, and then monthly at an absolute minimum. Let's see, Tiffany, you recently set up and linked your accounts. You have transactions that occurred in your previous year's budget instead of categorizing them. You can just reject them, and then you'll need to add those from a previous date, or there's a complex series of journal entries that you need to make to shift that income from one year to another. That's something our support team can walk you through if you have that question. It's a slightly more complicated than it should be, but that's how you move things from one year to another. And Sarah, if you're having trouble setting up a UCO account, just reach out to our team. They can help you. And they can also get you a call to set up your accounting. Absolutely. Then finally, some controls and compliance things. This is really important. This is where you make sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. And if you're not the treasurer, this is really good information. I like to call it a multi-approval view. So it used to be a Booster Club best practice that you had 2 approvers for every expense. I think that's good. I like to have multi-view of the accounting. And so I want to, all the board members should be able to see what's happening in the accounting. They should see the bank statements, and they should be able to run reports. In BoosterHub, we have a read-only feature that allows that. They can't do any edits, they can't make any changes, but they can see what's happening with the finances. You should present monthly at your board meeting with at least the treasurer's report. Usually the treasurer's report and the budget are 2 good reports. And that transparency builds trust both with your board, with your members, and your community. Make sure you're filing your 990 on time. It's usually due around 90 days after the fiscal year ends. You can plug your fiscal year end date into BoosterHub accounting settings, and it'll give you the date that it's due. This is pretty easy to get done because they kind of give you 3 years, but if you miss, you're going to lose your nonprofit status. And then finally, make sure that you're thinking about sales tax. It is definitely something booster clubs think because they're nonprofits, they don't have to pay sales tax or collect sales tax. It's generally not true in both cases. And so you'll want to contact your state's Department of Revenue, find out what you have to pay sales tax on. And then also at the end of the year, you're probably going to need to issue 1099s if you've paid for services above $600, and you can find out more information on that by Googling 1099s. Oh, that's a good point. If you have general accounting questions, not BoosterHub related, your AI tools, your ChatGPT, your Claude, they are terrific at accounting. In fact, the moving things to a previous year and to the next year, you can find that answer by putting it into Claude or ChatGPT. They can give you the answer. It's again, a complicated journal entry that'll do that for you. So if you have any questions about this, sales tax, you'll probably want to talk to your state Department of Revenue. I did have our team make a guide that I've got here at the end. It'll just give you a general idea. So if you're not sure, it's going to give you your state and go, oh my gosh, we probably should dive into that. There are a few states that don't have it. And then there are a few states that do, and then some that are kind of in between. So just to summarize what we've talked about here, you just want to try to keep your accounting as simple as you can. Start general, you can refine it later. Make sure you're categorizing everything that comes in and goes out, that you're keeping receipts, and that you're reconciling at least weekly, at least monthly, and I recommend weekly. Start with the end in mind. You've got to get to that 990 at the end of the day. So kind of start in there and always have multiple sets of eyes on your books. It's really a great way to be transparent and make sure that everything is doing what it's supposed to do. And you don't have to be an accountant. So we'll go there. BoosterHub currently does not generate 1099 statements. So you can find some tools that do that online. We're hoping to add that in the next year. And what does UCO stand for? That's a good question. They're our partner, our merchant payment processor, and I'm not sure. It used to be Payment Data Systems, but now it's UCO. So that's there. I'm going to jump to this slide, and on this QR code is where that state sales tax guide is, if you'd like that. If you're not a BoosterHub subscriber and you'd like to subscribe, you can use this QR code and that'll give you $50 off. If you are a current subscriber and you share this with another club, they will get $50 off and we'll donate $50 to your program. I'll leave this up for just a minute. I'm going to get my screens ready and bring up BoosterHub so we can do a little bit of work over there. Bear with me just a moment. And we will send out this recording tomorrow to everyone who is registered as well. All right, I'm going to switch screens. If you didn't get the QR code, let me know and I can drop that in. We'll have it in when we send out the recording, we'll put the link to that as well. And let me share what's happening on the screen. Bear with me as I move over. Okay, share. All right, there we go. And yes, Sarah, you can always get a personal Zoom with our team. If you just reach out on Contact Us, they'll send you the call link and you can get scheduled with our team. We do a lot of calls every day, try to help everyone out. That's our goal there. So yeah, just shoot us contact us and we'll get get that for you. So this is our accounting dashboard in BoosterHub. I'm just going to walk through everything and talk about some of the reports and how some things work. So some of you have used it a lot. It may be just review, and it may be new for some people. So you can enter any transaction manually in BoosterHub. So we'll start there with the new transaction screen. And we've got a bunch of different types of transactions. So these are really set up to help guide you. You know, it's really an in and an out and a transfer. That's basically what these are. But we've gone ahead and categorized them to make it easier for you. So a deposit's just as it says, a match from pending means there's something in BoosterHub that has already happened and you're going to match it to that so that you don't create duplicate income. And so if you have a cash tally sheet for that, you're going to want to select that and select the transactions that you're matching. The vendor credit allows you to receive a deposit, but reduce an expense. So it's a bit of a complex accounting entry, and this just helps make that entry for you so you don't have to figure out how to do that. Our accounts receivable payment, that's if you've used the pay later invoicing system and you need to make a payment on one of those invoices, you'll use that function. Again, these are all deposits or ins to your bank account, but they all function slightly different. On our withdrawals, the cash withdrawal, debit card, and check are all pretty much the same. Any of those are something taking out of the account. And then accept pending expense is a debit card transaction that has come in or a submit expense receipt that has come in. You're accepting that and going to put it in the account. A donor refund is you've given somebody a refund. So money's going out, but what's actually happening there is your income is going down, where generally if something's going out, your expense is going up. So it's sort of a reverse entry. And pay liability, similar, money's going out and you're reducing a liability account. So that's what those different types of transactions do. A journal entry is just a transfer. So for instance, if you categorize something wrong in your store and you didn't want it in concessions, you actually want it in merchandise, you can move that money around after the fact by using a journal entry. If you're using our booster credit system, that's the credits that are allocated usually for volunteering. You can make a booster credit entry here in accounting. Starting balance entries, those are kind of complicated because they have to they deal with retained earnings, and so it's a complex accounting entry, and so we have that set aside. It's actually a journal entry, but we created our own, so you can just go in when you're creating a new account, you can put the starting balance in. And then if you are using credit cards, you will use the payment and expense accounts, expense and payment entries here rather, that when you charge something on a credit card, you're actually creating a liability. And when you pay it, you're actually paying the liability, similar to our pay liability here. So that's the reason for all the different types of transactions and what they do in BoosterHub. Go back over to our screen. This is our submit expense form. You have the check request, debit card expense, if you want your debit card funded. These do not trigger any movement of funds on the debit cards. They're just for recording purposes, but you can fill that out. It does pre-populate your list of vendors here if you need it, and then you can select a delivery option and attach receipts here. if you are using the cashier screen in BoosterHub, when you ring those items up, it is calculating that cash and putting it in the cash box. You will want to do a cash tally sheet. That is how you clear those transactions out of that cash box. And what's really happening behind the scenes, it's moving the money from the cash box to an account we call cash undeposited funds, and it's waiting for you to receive that under the deposit match from pending. And then when you receive it, it's going to put that money in your bank account. So it's kind of a 3-step process. And if you think about it, you collect the money at the concession stand, then you take all the money at the end of the night and you put it in your purse or your bag. And so it's kind of in transit for some period of time. And then you're going to get to the bank and deposit it. That's what the cash tally sheet process does. It covers that whole transition period, and counts the money in the cash box, moves it to undeposited, and then sets it up for deposit later. It also will adjust if it's off, and that's what we call that cash tally over under account. It's going to make entries in there depending on if you're short cash or you're over cash. Yes, you can use the cash tally sheet if you're not using the cashier store. But in that case, it's going to make that entry automatically. It's going to tell you actually that you're under, rather that you're over. You've collected money that you haven't rung up. So you'll just need to make a journal entry if you do that, to adjust for that income. And that's where I think a lot of people get confused. It's very easy to duplicate your income. And so a lot of times what you're trying to do is match something that already happened. And that's generally what the cash tally sheet process does. If you want to create invoices, you'll use our pay later system. Just going to go through the dashboard here. So our dashboard is telling us we have some bank transactions that have come in. We can find those in Transaction Hub, and we'll look at those in just a minute. We have some submitted expenses and we have some pending cash transactions. This is going to give us a look at what's happening with those submitted expenses and the cash tally sheet that's in transit. So this part of the dashboard is going to tell you these are the things that need done. These are the things that are outstanding. So you can find that information pretty quickly here. I'm going to visit just the Transaction Hub. So in the Transaction Hub, the submitted expenses, they would need to be typed in. In the Transaction Hub, if the transaction's green, it's telling you it's already found that transaction. It matches the date, the amount, and the vendor, and you can just click match, and it's just going to clear that transaction. If it's yellow, which I don't have a yellow one here to show you, it means it thinks it could be that transaction, and then you may need to determine that. This white one is saying this is not in BoosterHub. There's no match to it. So I need to categorize it with my chart of accounts and add it, or it's possible maybe I combined it with something else and it's just not matching, and in which case I would reject it. If you have multiple accounts connected, you can filter them here at the top. So that'll pull just the account. And if you do have a BoosterHub debit card and there are transactions on it, you will see the debit card populate. And the debit cards, I think, only populate if there are actual transactions here. So if you see the card there, that means there's transactions there. If you categorize something incorrectly, you'll need to find that transaction in your ledger. So we'll go back to the accounting dashboard and we'll go to our bank ledger, and you would find that particular transaction, edit it, and you can change the category there. So you can always correct anything that you've done by going to the transaction. And now let's dive into the reports. So in BoosterHub, it defaults to your current budget versus actual. And this is one of the things I just wanted to show everyone. We were talking earlier about categories and chart of accounts. This is how we have set up in our pro account. We can have these different chart of accounts across different programs. So volleyball, football, baseball, soccer. And this is how we look at our reporting. So rather than having fan packages for every single sport and a very long list of a chart of accounts, we can have one line item and look at that across different columns. And so that's something that you want to think about if you are when you're setting up your chart of accounts, is which way you want those reports to be. Here we've got our balance sheet. So again, something that you don't look at very often, but it's a great report. It's going to show you, in this case, we have a lot of cash boxes. We've got various bank accounts, and then we have, potential liabilities on the system here. Our income statement, again, this is just our profit and loss. We saw this in the webinar, so I'm going to just quickly go through these. The treasurer's report, again, is going to be just like we saw. We do add, if you're using our pay later feature and you have a lot of invoices outstanding, we do have a great accounts receivable tab on the treasurer's report where you can see invoices you have outstanding, and some payments have been made, or if they're on a payment plan, or no payments have been made. And then we've got, it'll show you your percentages. So it's a great accounts receivable tool. Not everyone knows that it's there, but you can find that in the treasurer's report. The general ledger and general journal, these are the basis to any accounting system. This is where every single transaction is recorded. So your general ledger, it's going to set it up by the chart of accounts. And the general journal is going to show you every single transaction that happens in your system. So if you ever can't find something and you can't remember if you put it in that bank account or a different cash box, the general journal is a great report to use. Our accounts receivable report is similar to what you saw in the treasurer's report. This is going to show you any invoices that you have that are outstanding. And then journal entries, this is just a record of all the journal entries that you've made in the system. Your starting balances should be in here. This one's just for a certain time period. So if you don't see it, maybe go back to the beginning of when you started BoosterHub and you can find that there. In our operational reports, we have booster credits, a couple reports there, specifics, booster bucks, fundraising donations report. Our inventory report is tied over to the store and shows you what items you sold. We get a lot of questions about this, like people go into store transactions and try to pull, what was sold. You can find out what was sold. Let me see if I've got one here, something up here. If you click on an item, and I don't have any sold here, it'll list the people that actually purchased that item, and you can get that detail from the inventory report. Let's see, Sarah, you said, yes, once you save your budget, you cannot change it. And let's see, what did you do? So, would making a separate spreadsheet. So you can duplicate the budget. We just do that to make sure that somebody's not going in and changing the budget figures. But if you do need to do something, you can edit it and then duplicate it and save it as the revised budget. And when you create a store item, can I send a link for just, let's see, you can send a link, Kristen, to the individual store item. The way you have to do that right now is you go into store and select online store, and then you'll go into the store page of your webmaster and click on the item and pull the link from the top, and then you can go back to store and unclick online store. You'll see an update to that in a few weeks where you can actually get that link from the product itself, but then it won't be in your store. You can just do it, or you can invoice them. Either way, it works either way. If you want it to show on the books, you may want to invoice them. This is a really hefty report that I don't see enough people use, but if you're using invoicing and you are invoicing for fees and things like that, our paid unpaid orders allows you to select whatever the product is. In a lot of cases, you'll find this is band fees, and you can see who's paid in full, who has a balance due, who hasn't made any payments to their invoice, and who doesn't have an order for that. So it's a really powerful little report, a great tool for operations and collecting things. Store transactions we have, I don't recommend using that for very much data. It's just a huge report that has everything in it. You can see your submitted expenses and cash tally sheets. And then another report that I think a lot of people miss is our credit card and ACH batch report. And these are the batch deposits going into your bank account. If you click on those, it's going to give you the detail and show you the exact transactions that have gone into that account, excuse me. And this is where you can find if anything has been missing. In BoosterHub, if we know that it should have had these transactions in it and it doesn't have those, you'll get a notification that a transaction was not batched. So that's how we reconcile that. And cash tally over under report, that's going to tell you if any entries were made when you submitted your cash tally sheet. And then we have the sales tax 990 and 1099 reports, which are all tax related. One other thing is we have non-cash assets. So if you have some assets in your booster club and you don't have them on your books, you can store them here just for record. If we invoice, do we have to have all their contact information without a specific customer in mind? Kristen, you have to have an email address. So that's how they send the invoice. If it's something, because that gives them the payment link to be able to pay. So if you just wanted to create sort of a dummy invoice, maybe add it to yourself as an invoice or maybe a dummy account. But generally speaking, you do need an email address because it is going to send that link for payment. And yes, we add membership dues to the store. That's where those would go. We do have the great budgeting tool. It sounds like most of you have used it, but you can create your budget here. And if you have already approved it, you can just duplicate it and make it the revised budget. Chart of accounts, I know someone asked earlier, can you customize it? Absolutely. It does force you to put everything under these bold headings, but under those and some of the other subheadings, you can add as many sub accounts as you want. So again, that's kind of a good place to start and figure out where you want everything and then add those chart of accounts from there. We don't currently have a way to add comments to the budget versus actual report. And then our program tags, those are the ones that create the columns in your reports so you can see things across the columns. They also track assets. So if you have money perhaps for a scholarship fund or marching band versus color guard or multiple sports teams, you'll want to use our program tags in pro accounting, and that gives you the ability to create those columns and run profit and loss for those groups. Category tags allow you, they work as filters. So if you want to see the reports with the filter of spiritware or the filter of merchandise or uniforms, then you'll use the category tags. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. Let me know if y'all have any questions. I know we've gone over an hour here, but we've got a lot of information. When reconciling your account, how would you fix the difference other than a zero balance plus minus when all enters are accounted for? Stephen, I would say that it's not reconciled till you figure out what the difference is. Sometimes there's a case where you just something happened and it's on one side and you can't fix it. So then I would recommend making an adjusting journal entry and explaining the case. This is why we can't get it to match. And then you'd probably use an account like the over-under account to settle that. So you would need two sides of the journal entry. So that's what I would recommend. And Sherry, are you able to see year-over-year data? You are not able to see it directly. You could pull the reports and download them and compare, but we don't currently have a way to see year-over-year. Heidi, can we customize anything in the check request? You cannot at this time. We know the issue with the pick up and drop off, the terminology is a little old. So I'm hoping that we'll have an update to that in the next few months. You can edit the club officer list. That's under settings, accounting setting, admin settings at the very bottom. You can edit the club officer list. Claudia, under chart of accounts to add the subcategory. Yeah, so if you want to add a subcategory in chart of accounts, you'll create a new account. the type of account that it is. We'll just create an income account, and let's call this our silent auction. And it'll be a sub account. And so that's where you'll add it. So here we'll add it to fundraising, which should be here, and we'll add it there. So that's how you create the sub account. Yes, Sarah, you can't upload all the parents and students without having to input each one individually. You'll find that on the dashboard and add people. And if you do have questions, general questions to how BoosterHub works, definitely recommend going to the Help Center, the BoosterHub Academy. That usually gets people up and going. If you can't find the answers in there, definitely reach out to our team and schedule a call, and we'll get you set up so that you can get your account up and running. Any other questions tonight? Thank you for everyone's time, and thank you for all that you do, because I know a lot of you we talk to on support, and I've been on calls with, and y'all are dedicated to serving the programs that serve the students, and not everyone knows how hard you guys work, and we do at BoosterHub, and we are working our hardest to try to make life easier for you, and everything that we introduce is an attempt to make that easier. So we love your feedback. If it's not making it easier, tell us why, or if there's things like Heidi, you mentioned on the check request, we'll see if we can get something updated there. We want to make it easier for you. So that's our goal. Like I said, my goal is within the next year to make you guys just all reconcilers and have most of the bookkeeping happening automatically under all the automation. Well, I hope that I was able to teach everyone just a little bit tonight. I hope you found some useful information, whether it be in the BoosterHub side or the general accounting side. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us on Contact Us. And if you're not a BoosterHub subscriber,